I am Nicole Fitzhugh. I am a member of the Board of Trustees. It is, you know, you too could be a member of the Board of Trustees if you felt like it. The opportunity's there for all of you out and off-site as well as here in the congregation. We at the First Unitarian Church of Oakland are an intentional, multi-generational, multiracial, and multicultural community. We work to serve justice within and beyond these walls. Sorry, I'm sort of ad-libbing. I do have one announcement this morning. One is that we are looking for someone to join, someone from the congregation to join the operations team. And operations might not seem like exciting work, but it is rewarding. If you have an interest in church operations and management, especially in assuring that our personnel policies and administration are up to date with labor laws and consistent with our mission and our values, the operations team would love to hear from you. So you can contact them at operationsteam@uuoakland.org. Thank you. Maybe she has more announcements. She's good. Can I steal this for that?
Our peace candle words come from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. Next, we light the Black Lives Matter candle. We light this candle today as a witness that represents the unquenchable fire for justice for Black people that burns in our hearts and guides our actions as a congregation. Together, we say, Black Lives Matter. We light this chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism. May it remind us of the divine spark in all of creation, the power of love to heal what is broken, and to be grateful for life's blessings each day. As we consider the meaning of the 4th of July, please join me in listening to the words of Frederick Douglass as read by his descendants.
Do I look there or there? Okay. Okay. My name is Alexa Ann Watson, and I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of
Frederick Douglass is my great-great-great-great.
I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of Frederick Douglass.
I am the great-great-great-great-grandchild.
I've been counting on my fingers since I was like 5.
Whenever you're ready, here we go.
This is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom.
Fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that cluster about this day. The simple story of it is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men, and if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment.
With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression.
They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence?
Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us?
I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary.
Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common.
The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me.
The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me.
This 4th of July is yours, not mine.
You may rejoice, I must mourn.
Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed.
Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke.
For it is not light that is needed, but fire.
It is not the gentle shower, but thunder.
We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
The feeling of the nation must be quickened.
The conscience of the nation must be roused.
The propriety of the nation must be startled.
The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed.
And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim.
To him, your celebration is a sham.
Your boasted liberty an unholy license.
Your national greatness, swelling vanity.
Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless.
Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence.
Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery.
Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings,
With all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him
Mere bombast.
Fraud.
deception,
Impiety.
and hypocrisy. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country.
This speech was written almost 170 years ago, but this part of it is still extremely relevant, especially with today's protests.
I think that when people are oppressed, they feel silenced, and if someone feels silenced, they get angry. There are certain tactics that you need to use to get people to really hear your voice, and it's not always going to be just like a very calm discussion.
I think he's mostly talking to the people who are already on his side, but believe that they can still try to talk this out, or that things are still justifiable. I know a lot of people at the time were saying, and people now are still saying, that it's not as bad as it could be.
While the 4th of July probably does not feel the same to me as it does to others, I wouldn't say that it has no meaning, because it is the time when America as a country became free from another country. But I would say that it's not the time in which I gained my freedom.
He had a lot of hope, especially for his age. And like, I'm getting to the point in my life where I'm only 20 years old, but I'm exhausted. Like, I have these thoughts like, will we ever really get to this point? Or is this really something that we should actually spend our time fighting for?
Somebody once said that pessimism is a tool of white oppression, and I think that's true. I think in many ways we are still slaves to the notion that it will never get better. But I think that there is hope, and I think it's important that we celebrate Black joy and Black life, and we remember that change is possible, change is probable, and that there's hope.
Now is the time in our service when we greet each other. If you're in Hamilton Hall, you can talk to your fellow congregants. If you're on Zoom, you can unmute and say hello or add your greetings in the chat. If you're on Twitch, you can greet in the chat. Good morning, congregation. Let's greet one another. We are small, but we are a mighty social group. All right. Please join me in singing hymn number 389, Gathered Here, as led by the Chancel Choir.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, gathered here in one strong body, 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 gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near.
Our next reading comes from Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman, accompanied by the Boston Pops Orchestra.
And 3 years ago, to be exact, our founders dared to declare the world's most revolutionary act, a pact sworn for liberty and equality. Out of many was born one people, a teeming nation made of nations, at its very foundation, a dream for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today, we gather so that our founders' words do not go diminished, but also so that the work does not go unfinished. For it's not just in a declaration of independence, but the everyday declaration of its descendants that make a people equal. It is our right and our role to remember these words scratched on a scroll so we may live them and heal our nation whole. We roll up our sleeves, we believe in the dream, in these American stories, in the glory of the struggle. For it is from our struggle that comes our nation's strength, for the lengths that we fight for what is right is the fullest measure of our country's might. And while we cannot shake or cast aside our past, every day we write the future. Together we sign it, together we declare it, we share it. For this truth marches on inside each of us. Americans know one another by our love of liberty, when in fact, we are liberated by our love for one another. We understand that a house divided cannot stand. And so let us make a pact to be the country that acts as compassionate as we are courageous. In the Declaration's pages, we write a new order for the ages, where out of many, we are one, bright as a sun and bold as an eagle, a nation of all people, by all people, for all people. Let this 4th of July move forth apply to redeem the dream. As we remember those words forever ignited, that we, the people, have so long heard and decided that we are right to stand, but revolutionary when we stand united.
All right, now is our embracing meditation. So if you're here, feel free to name anybody you are memorializing or celebrating today. And if you are on Zoom or Twitch, go ahead and put those into the chat. Together, please join with me in saying, we hold them in our care. We hold them in our care. Spirit of life and love, we come to you with great gratitude for all the blessings we have here on earth. We come to you with sorrow in our heart for all of the individual pains we are going through, as well as the national pains, including the great division we have right now in states, partially due to recent Supreme Court opinions. Also because of the multiple mass shootings we have. I think I counted 18 in the last week, from Sunday to Saturday. We ask for your help in helping us heal ourselves, work with each other, listen more compassionately to people with whom we disagree. We ask for strength in moving forward in our continual struggle for justice. We ask all this with great gratitude and deep humility for all of the blessings we share today. Blessed be, amen. Now we will sing "We Would Be One" along with the chancel choir.
Understanding
Our sermon today will be presented by Reverend Rica Kaufel, who, among other connections, has ministered at the Orange Coast Unitarian Universalist Church in Costa Mesa, California. Let's explore a fresh perspective on the 4th of July.
I moved from Germany to the US for college when I was 20 years old. It was my great adventure. And I always thought I was the first person in my family to visit the US, let alone live here. My parents hadn't been before I moved here, and neither had my grandparents. Or so I thought. I mentioned this once to Tante Gerdi, my Aunt Gerdi, my grandmother's younger sister, and she said, oh, but that's not true. Uncle Kurt spent 11 months in Nebraska. Uncle Kurt was her husband and had been my grandfather's best friend since they were young. He collected minerals, which he even let me play with very carefully when I was growing up, and he always had blackberry gumdrops for me in his shirt pocket whenever I came to visit. He also lived in East Germany until the wall fell. So however he made it to the US for 11 months, to Nebraska of all places, was a mystery to me. Tante Gerdi was quick to clear this up for me. Though highly critical of Hitler's regime, Uncle Kurt was drafted as soon as World War II started and stationed in Italy. There, he was captured by American soldiers and brought to the US as a prisoner of war. He was sent to labor on a farm in Nebraska. Now, by the time I found out about this, he had already died, so I never got to hear his recollection of that time. But according to Tante Gerdi, he remembered this time quite fondly. Yes, the work on the farm was hard, but the meals were hearty and plentiful. The beds in the barracks where he and the other German prisoners slept were warm and comfortable, and the farmer's family on whose farm they worked was friendly and welcoming. They had evenings and Sundays off, and during his free time, Uncle Kurt took drawing classes where he created pictures of exotic animals and birds. This was in stark contrast to the other relatives who were prisoners of war. My Uncle Max, for example, was sent to France, where the German soldiers were not even given houses, having to live in cold, wet trenches until they built some raggedy huts themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. I know what Germany did in the war. I understand that the French were not at all inclined to make the lives of prisoners of war comfortable in any way. I understand that. But for that very reason, I was even more surprised to hear how well my Uncle Kurt was treated. In fact, Tante Gerdi, mother of an infant in East Berlin, tried her hardest after the war to save enough of their small daily provisions to send care packages with some chocolate, some tobacco to her husband, until he wrote back to her that this was not necessary at all. Not only did they have chocolate and tobacco on the farm, but the quality of either was also much better. I was surprised and I was grateful because I loved my Uncle Kurt very much, and because he was never a supporter of Hitler and his regime, but instead found himself drafted into a war he never wanted. In fact, Uncle Kurt's story made me love the US, this country I myself had moved to at a young age, even more. Interestingly, though, the few people here to whom I told this story were just as confused as me. They had never heard about German prisoners of war in the US. It made me wonder if my uncle's story was an isolated case, a rare occurrence. But that notion is actually far from the truth. A couple of years ago, while listening to Radiolab, one of my favorite podcasts, Jad Abumrad and Robert Krulwich, the hosts of the show back then, shone some light on this story in an episode entitled Nazi Summer Camp. Apparently, towards the end of World War II, there were almost 500,000 prisoners of war in the US, mostly German, but also some Japanese and some Italian soldiers. They were located in every single state except for Vermont, sometimes housed in tent cities or churches or high school gyms and even rodeo grounds until more suitable accommodations could be built. There were over 200 base camps, some of them housing up to 8,000 prisoners. And life in these camps was not bad. People had plenty of food. In fact, they were given so much food that in some cases they could not even finish it all. Though hard work was required, the prisoners were also treated well. And during times off, there was even entertainment. Prisoners were given musical instruments. They formed orchestras. There were pottery classes, or in the case of my Uncle Kurt, drawing classes. Of course, not everybody was happy with that. There were people in the population and in the media who were quite enraged about this from the very start. They were enraged about the cushy life enemy soldiers who were killing the sons of American families in the war abroad were provided with. After all, the war took a toll on America as well. But despite growing criticism, the US government held on to their treatment of enemy prisoners of war. The Geneva Conventions had just been signed a little over 10 years before, stating that prisoners of war should be given the same rations and treatments as the soldiers of one's own military. The US abided by these conventions, determined that there should not be a repeat of the gruesomeness of World War I. But of course, we now know that World War I's gruesomeness was to be overshadowed. We know that Germany did not abide by any laws and conventions. This became clear when US soldiers discovered German prisoner of war camps for American soldiers who were treated cruelly, violently, and who were even killed, massacred after surrender. That Germany did not follow any laws or conventions became even more clear when the concentration camps were discovered. At this point, resources in the US were becoming scarce. Also, in the camps hosting German soldiers, the relative freedom allowed the convinced Nazis, those who were not simply drafted but who followed Hitler willingly and enthusiastically to organize themselves, perpetuate their ideologies, and bully prisoners like my Uncle Kurt, who did not share their convictions. All of this led to a renewed debate about how many of the scarce resources should be spent on such deplorable people. Should you be fair and humane to those who showed such a disregard for humanity? When push came to shove, there was a vote in Congress, and Congress voted to keep upholding the Geneva Conventions, to keep treating the German prisoners decently. Not only did they say that they didn't want to sink to the same level of Nazis, they didn't even want to use Nazis as a standard or a measurement. They decided to stick to their own standards, their own American ideals. And because of that, my Uncle Kurt, with his blackberry gumdrops and his mineral collection, did not have to suffer. And after some time, he returned safely home to his wife and his infant daughter. When my own young daughter asks me, what parts of America do I love? This is one of the stories that I tell her. I do think the choice to keep prisoners in humane circumstances, to treat them well, was a choice well made. I don't think it was an easy choice. Upholding one's ideals is often not. Choosing to hold on to one's goodness when faced with such evil is not easy. but I think it was right, and it fills me with gratitude. But of course, we also know that during that time, not only good choices were made, because these camps were not the only camps. There were also internment camps where over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry, the majority of them American citizens, were housed after they were yanked out of their lives simply because their background made them seem like a threat. And the conditions in these camps, sparsely erected wooden buildings that did not keep out the cold, the wind, sometimes even the rain, where up to 25 people were crammed into rooms designed for 4, where there was often no plumbing, these conditions were bad. Food was scarce and of low quality, lives were destroyed, and harm was done. The ruptures in families and the psychological damage that was done carried forth into the next generations as well. And the harm that was done in these camps was done to civilians, mothers and fathers and children, grandfathers and grandmothers. People like you and me, people who did not fire at American sons on the battlefield, and who did not commit genocide. And of course, all of this also happened long before the civil rights movement, when segregation was still rampant in many parts of the US, including the military. I'm so grateful that my Uncle Kurt was treated so kindly. And also, the US treated Nazi soldiers better than many of its own citizens. Both of this is true. It is undeniable that racism played a part in this. What this shows is something that also became quite apparent again in recent years, that in many parts of America, a white life counts more than the life of a person of color, even if the white life is a Nazi soldier or sympathizer. Holding the hard truth is also an act of love. It's also an act of patriotism. Now, in the podcast that I mentioned, the hosts also bring up racism, but in addition, they quote Paul Springer, a military historian who raises another reason, not one to replace racism as an explanation for this grave and unjust discrepancy in treatment, but to add to it. He says that one of the main differences was that there were clear rules governing international law, like the Geneva Conventions, when it came to the treatment of prisoners of war. The same was not true for American citizens. In fact, even Japanese soldiers who became prisoners of war were treated far better than the American civilians of Japanese ancestry in the internment camps. For them, there were no clear rules. They were in a weird gray zone outside of the law. I say that this explanation is in addition to that of racism, because I think the two go hand in hand. Within systemic racism, having rules applied to you, laws work in your favor, is not a basic right, but a privilege that not everyone enjoys. We have seen this time and time again. We have seen this when, after 9/11, the Bush administration announced that people suspected of sympathizing with Al-Qaeda were terrorists, not prisoners of war, and therefore the Geneva Conventions did not apply, leading to the infamous camps of Guantanamo Bay. To this day, out of the 780 prisoners who were taken to Guantanamo Bay, 37 detainees still remain at the camp. They have been held there for nearly 2 decades without a trial. And we have also seen this when the Trump administration decided that the rights usually guaranteed to asylum seekers do not apply at the southern border, separating children from their parents, holding people in dehumanizing and cruel conditions, and making a mockery of legal procedure when 3-year-old children were asked to make a case in front of immigration judges. We have seen this when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, a law severely restricting immigration to the US, the first law to suddenly do so for one specific group after centuries of Europeans freely and legally entering the US to start new lives here. We see this every time the police violates people of color, especially Black people, employing measures of drastic and even fatal violence for minor infractions or for even just existing, with often little to no legal consequences for the officers. And of course, we see this in Frederick Douglass's moving and profound speech, in which he makes the point that the ideals and values of the Declaration of Independence, with its grand opening promise that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, that all people are created equal, does not, in fact, leave any room for enslavement of human beings. Douglass here does not attack the Declaration of Independence or the values it espouses. What he decries and condemns, though, is the fact that its guarantees are not equally applied to every person in the US. He says, in that instrument, the Declaration of Independence, I hold there is neither warrant, license, nor sanction of the hateful thing, but interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble, consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? Is it a gateway? Or is it in the temple? It is neither. Douglass does not take issue with the American ideals, but with the inconsistencies of their application. And it is these inconsistencies precisely that have and still do create systems of oppression and of structural racism. What I love about this country is that there are ideals and laws and promises that allowed for my Uncle Kurt, an enemy soldier, to be treated decently and fairly. What breaks my heart and fills me not just with despair and anger, but also the urgent need to work for change, is the fact that the very same ideals, laws, and promises are not fulfilled in the same way for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the US. On the 4th of July, we celebrate American independence and what it promises. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Maybe for some of you, these sentences and what they imply are part of what you love about the US. I also think they are good rules to live by as a country. These sentences are a good underlying foundation for all other laws and rules we may come up with. And maybe it is now time, maybe the act of patriotism, of love for our country that is so direly needed, is to stop viewing these sentences as just the ideals that the country was founded on and that we might aspire to, but as binding rights and promises and a resulting duty for all of us, for all Americans, to make sure that they are applied equally and consistently to all. May it be so, and blessed be.
Once upon a time, most folks used the offering plate to fulfill their pledges of financial support. Nowadays, lots of folks click on their church websites, or set up automatic transfers from their checking accounts. Some still write a monthly check, paying their church bill along with all the others. But passing the offering plate was never just a practical exercise. It has always been a ritual. Even if your pledge is paid up, it is worthwhile for you to bring even just $1 to drop into the plate as a ritual reminder of that form of love we call generosity. Let it be a reminder that, after meeting our obligations to ourselves and to our households and the communities to which we belong and are committed, we must still keep our capacity to give. The practice of giving, until it is second nature and first response, helps bring forth the realm of love. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Join with me in the congregational commitment to the work of the church, which is weaving a tapestry of love we call community. We dedicate ourselves, and these are offerings.
In the 1950s, grappling with patriotism and his country after World War II, the German poet Bertolt Brecht wrote the Children's Hymn, an alternative national anthem for a new Germany he was envisioning. I want to leave you today with the last stanza of that hymn. And because we'll make it better, let us guard and love our home. Love it as our dearest country, as the others love their own. May it be so. Happy 4th of July, and blessed be.